My mom dumped me at 16 for her real kids. Now she wants help with their college, but I silenced her plea with a lesson she'll never forget. I never thought the woman who gave birth to me would show up at my office 12 years later, begging for money she never thought I'd have. The irony was so thick I could taste it as I sat behind my mahogany desk, staring at the security monitor that showed a frail woman in a worn coat pacing nervously in my lobby. My name is Adrienne Blake, I'm 28 years old and I run one of Seattle's most successful tech startups. The company I built from nothing now occupies 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, employs over 200 people, and generates millions in revenue annually. But none of that success could have prepared me for this moment. My receptionist's voice crackled through the intercom with barely concealed confusion. "Mr. Blake, there's a woman here claiming to be your mother. She says her name is Margaret Blake, and she's been waiting for almost an hour. Should I call security?" The young woman had been working for me for 2 years, and I'd never once mentioned having a mother. As far as anyone in my current life knew, I'd materialized into existence at 18 when I started college on a full scholarship I'd fought tooth and nail to earn. I hadn't spoken to Margaret Blake since I was 16 years old. That was the day she and my stepfather Roger decided I wasn't worth keeping around anymore, when they made it crystal clear that their biological children mattered more than the boy they'd raised since he was 2. I can still remember every word of that conversation, etched into my memory like acid on glass. "You're not our real son," Roger had said, standing in the doorway of what had been my bedroom for 14 years, his arms crossed and his face set in stone. "We need to focus on our own children now. James is starting high school. Emma's going to need braces. And frankly, we can't afford to support someone who isn't actually family." Margaret had stood behind him like a shadow, her hands clasped in front of her, refusing to meet my eyes. The woman who had tucked me into bed every night until I was 10, who had helped me with homework and attended every parent-teacher conference, suddenly couldn't even look at me. "It's for the best, Adrienne," she'd whispered. "You're almost an adult anyway. This will teach you independence." Just like that, I was out on the street with nothing but a backpack containing 3 changes of clothes, a battered laptop I'd bought with money from my part-time job at the grocery store, and exactly $47 in cash. The first night was the worst. I'd always imagined homelessness as something that happened to other people who made bad choices or had addiction problems. I never thought it would be me, a straight-A student with perfect attendance and college aspirations, sleeping in the back seat of my rusty Honda Civic behind a 24-hour diner. The car had been a 16th birthday gift from Margaret and Roger just 3 months earlier, back when I was still their son. Now it was my only shelter from the Seattle rain that seemed to fall endlessly, matching the tears I couldn't seem to stop. Those first few months were a blur of survival and desperation. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, wash my face in gas station bathrooms, and try to make myself presentable for school. My grades plummeted initially because it's hard to focus on calculus when you're wondering where your next meal is coming from. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, noticed my decline and pulled me aside one day. When I broke down and told her what had happened, she actually cried. She helped me apply for every scholarship and grant available, and she even let me shower in the faculty locker room when the gym was closed. I worked 3 jobs that first year: morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoon shift at a grocery store, and weekend nights at a gas station. I lived on dollar menu items and whatever expired food the grocery store let me take home. I studied by the light of street lamps when I couldn't afford to keep the electricity on in the tiny studio apartment I eventually managed to rent. Every night, I'd fall asleep promising myself that someday I'd be successful enough that no one could ever throw me away again. But that was 12 years ago. Now here she was, sitting across from my mahogany desk in the corner office I'd earned through sleepless nights, countless rejections, and a determination forged in the fire of abandonment. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. Her once vibrant brown hair had gone gray and thin, pulled back in a messy bun that did nothing to hide the worry lines etched around her eyes. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind of outfit someone wears when they want to look respectable but can't afford anything new. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched her purse, and I noticed she kept glancing around my office like she couldn't quite believe where she was. This wasn't the confident woman who had watched me pack my entire life into a backpack without shedding a single tear. This wasn't the woman who had served dinner to Roger, James, and Emma while I stood in the doorway asking if I could come home, who had turned her back and walked into the kitchen without saying a word. This was someone defeated, desperate, and clearly uncomfortable in the luxurious surroundings that represented everything I'd built without her. "Adrian," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, and I noticed how it shook slightly. "You've done so well for yourself. I always knew you were special, that you'd make something of your life. Look at all this." Her eyes darted around my office, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows with their panoramic view of Elliott Bay, the expensive artwork on the walls, the leather furniture that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. "You've become everything I knew you could be." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face for any trace of the woman who had once kissed scraped knees and made chocolate chip cookies when I was sad. That woman seemed to have disappeared completely, replaced by this nervous stranger who spoke to me like I was a potential employer rather than someone she'd raised for 16 years. "Did you? Because I distinctly remember you telling me I was nothing but a burden, an obligation you'd finally gotten tired of carrying." My voice was calm, professional even, the same tone I used in board meetings when delivering bad news to investors. But inside, I could feel that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The same one that had kept me awake during those first terrible months on my own. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, and her hands tightened on her purse. "I know things ended badly between us, and I've regretted it every day since. You have to understand, Adrian, those were difficult times for all of us. Roger and we've been following your success in the papers. Your company made the front page of the business section last month. The article said you're worth over $50 million now." There was something in her voice when she mentioned the money, a hunger that made my skin crawl. It reminded me of the way she used to look at the lottery tickets she'd buy every Friday, convinced that this week would be the week her luck changed. "Get to the point, Margaret." I used her first name deliberately, watching as she winced like I'd hit her. The woman who used to demand I call her mom, who would correct me with sharp words if I ever forgot, had lost that right the day she chose Roger's comfort over my existence. I wasn't her son anymore. I was just Adrian, a stranger who happened to share some DNA and a few increasingly distant childhood memories. Her carefully constructed facade began to crack, revealing the desperation underneath. She took a shaky breath and leaned forward in her chair. "It's about James and Emma. They're both college age now, and we're struggling with tuition costs. James got accepted to Washington State University for engineering, and Emma wants to study nursing at Seattle University. They're good kids, Adrian, smart like you were. They get straight A's, they're involved in extracurriculars, they volunteer at the local food bank, but we just don't have the money for their education. And the loans they're offering have such high interest rates. We're looking at over $200,000 in debt between the two of them." She paused, gauging my reaction, then continued with growing desperation. "I thought maybe since you've done so well for yourself, since you understand how important education is, maybe you could help them. Not a handout, you understand, but an investment in their future. They could pay you back once they graduate and get good jobs. You'd be like their guardian angel, the big brother who helped them achieve their dreams." There it was. The real reason she'd swallowed her pride and tracked me down after 12 years of silence. Not an apology for destroying my adolescence. Not an attempt to rebuild our relationship. Not even a simple acknowledgement that she might have made a mistake. Just her hand stretched out, palm up, looking for money. She dressed it up in pretty language about investments and guardian angels. But at its core, this was nothing more than a sophisticated begging session. I felt that old rage building up inside me, the same anger that had kept me warm during those first nights sleeping in my car, that had driven me to study until my eyes bled and work multiple jobs until my body screamed for rest. It was the rage that had fueled my success, the burning desire to prove that I was worth something, that I could build a life so magnificent that no one would ever be able to discard me again. "You thought maybe what?" I pressed, wanting to hear her say it out loud. I wanted her to admit that she had come here not as a mother seeking reconciliation with her son, but as a beggar hoping to profit from the success of someone she'd once thrown away like garbage. "Maybe you could help them with their education costs," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush now that the pretense was dropping. "You know how important education is. You turned out so successful because you went to college, and they deserve the same chance. They're good kids, Adrian. They've never gotten into trouble. they respect their parents, they work hard in school. They deserve every opportunity to succeed, and you're in a position to give that to them." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if she was convincing herself that this request was not only reasonable but somehow owed to her. "Think about it as giving back to the family that raised you. We may have had our differences, but we gave you 16 good years. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head, helped you with homework, took you to doctor's appointments. Surely that counts for something?" I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. She was trying to reframe my childhood as some kind of business transaction, as if raising me had been a favor she'd done that now deserved repayment with interest. They deserve a chance? That's interesting, Margaret. What about the chance I deserved when I was their age? What about the chance to finish high school in my own home instead of sleeping in a car and working 3 jobs just to afford a studio apartment in the worst part of town? The memories came flooding back with painful clarity. The nights I'd fallen asleep over my homework because I'd worked a double shift at the diner, the mornings I'd gone to school hungry because I'd spent my last few dollars on gas to get there. The guidance counselor who'd almost cried when I explained why my grades had dropped after I moved out. I remembered the college application essays I'd written about overcoming adversity, carefully omitting the fact that the adversity had come from my own family. What about my chance to have someone believe in me when I was struggling? I continued, my voice growing harder with each word. What about my chance to have a family that didn't abandon me the moment things got financially tight? What about my chance to not spend my 17th birthday alone in a gas station parking lot, counting my tips and wondering if I'd ever feel like I belonged anywhere again? Margaret's face reddened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman who used to scold me for leaving dishes in the sink. That was different, Adrian. We were in a difficult financial situation then. Roger had just gotten his hours cut at the warehouse, and we had to make some hard choices. We thought you were mature enough and strong enough to make it on your own. You were always so independent, so capable. Even as a little boy, you never needed as much attention as other children. Strong enough? I stood up abruptly, my hands pressed flat against the desk, and I had the satisfaction of watching her shrink back in her chair. I was 16 years old, Margaret. 16, do you know what that means? It means I was still a child. It means I was still growing, still learning, still needing guidance and support from the adults who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I began pacing behind my desk, the words pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. I ate ramen noodles for dinner every single night for 2 years because that's all I could afford. I wore the same 3 shirts to school on rotation because I couldn't buy new clothes. I did my homework by candlelight when I couldn't afford electricity. I called home crying for months, begging you to let me come back, telling you I was sorry for whatever I'd done wrong, and you hung up on me every single time. The transformation in her face was almost comical. She looked genuinely shocked, as if the idea that I might have struggled after they kicked me out had never occurred to her. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. I didn't realize it was that hard for you. You always seemed so capable, so mature for your age. When you stopped calling, I assumed you were doing fine, that you'd found your way. Roger said you were probably better off without us holding you back. I stopped calling because you made it clear I wasn't welcome, I said, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of her. She seemed to shrink even more, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I was the one with the power in this relationship. You didn't know how hard it was because you never bothered to find out. You could have checked on me. You could have driven by my apartment to see if I was okay. You could have asked my teachers how I was doing. But you didn't do any of those things because it was easier to pretend I didn't exist. I sat down on the edge of my desk, looking down at her. You made your choice 12 years ago, Margaret. You chose James and Emma over me. You chose Roger's comfort over your own son's well-being. You chose to believe that DNA mattered more than the 14 years we'd spent as a family. You chose to prioritize their college funds over my basic need for shelter and food. Now you want me to fix the consequences of that choice? Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she reached into her purse for a tissue. When she looked up at me, her face was streaked with mascara and desperation. Please, Adrian, I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. I truly am. But James and Emma are innocent in all this. They don't deserve to suffer because of mistakes I made years ago. They don't even really remember you leaving, they were so young. James was only 7, and Emma was 6. To them, you're like a mythical older brother who disappeared one day. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice becoming more urgent. "They're good kids, Adrian. James wants to be an engineer like you, actually. He's always been good with computers and math. Emma wants to be a nurse because she wants to help people. They're not asking for handouts, they're willing to work hard. They just need someone to believe in them, to give them the same chance you got. And I was innocent too," I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of 12 years of pain and hard-won wisdom. "But that didn't stop you from making me suffer, did it? You know what the real difference is between me and them, Margaret? When I needed help, when I was scared and alone and calling home in tears, I was told I wasn't family. When your precious biological children need help, you come crawling to the son you discarded, expecting him to open his wallet and solve your problems." She was crying openly now, black mascara running down her cheeks in ugly streaks. "I was trying to do what was best for everyone. Roger said if we kept supporting you, we wouldn't have enough money for our own children's future. He said it wasn't fair to take opportunities away from his biological kids to support someone else's child. I was caught in the middle, Adrian. I was trying to hold my marriage together and do right by all my children. Someone else's child," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us like a toxic cloud. "There it is. After 16 years of raising me, of being the only mother I ever knew, I was never truly your child, was I? I was just a temporary responsibility, something you could discard when it became inconvenient to keep me around." Margaret tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, stepping back to maintain the distance between us. "That's not true, Adrian. I loved you. I still love you. You were my son in every way that mattered. But Roger is my husband, and James and Emma are my children too. I had to think about their future. I had to make an impossible choice." "No," I said firmly, and my voice carried an authority I'd never possessed as a teenager. "You don't abandon someone you love. You don't hang up on them when they're crying and scared and sleeping in their car. You don't erase them from your life like they never existed and then show up 12 years later looking for a handout. Love isn't something you can turn on and off when it's convenient, Margaret. Real love is unconditional. It doesn't come with expiration dates or DNA requirements." I walked back to my chair and sat down, putting the desk between us again. "You want to know what love looks like? Love is my college professor who noticed I was struggling financially and helped me get a work-study job in the computer lab. Love is my first boss who took a chance on a kid with no experience and taught me everything he knew about programming. Love is my girlfriend Sarah, who doesn't care that I don't have a family because she loves the family we're building together." Margaret looked confused. "Girlfriend? You're seeing someone?" "For 3 years now," I said, and I couldn't help smiling when I thought about Sarah. "She's a doctor at Seattle Children's Hospital. We met at a charity fundraiser for homeless youth. She knows my whole story, and she's never once suggested that I should forgive you or try to rebuild this relationship. She understands that some bridges are meant to stay burned." The confusion on Margaret's face deepened. "But don't you want a family? Don't you want to belong somewhere?" "I have a family," I said simply. "I have Sarah. I have friends who would do anything for me. I have employees who depend on me and colleagues who respect me. I have a chosen family of people who earn their place in my life every day through their actions, not people who think they deserve a place because of genetics." "So you won't help them?" Her voice was small, defeated, but I could still hear that underlying note of disbelief, as if she couldn't quite comprehend that I might refuse her request. "Help them?" I walked back to my desk and pulled out my checkbook, and for a moment, I saw hope flicker in her eyes like a candle flame. Instead of writing a check to James and Emma's college funds, I began writing one for $50,000 to the Seattle Youth Shelter. This is going to an organization that helps kids who've been abandoned by their families. Kids like I was. Kids whose parents decided they weren't worth keeping around. I tore off the check and handed it to her, watching as her face went pale and her hands began to shake. "These are the children I choose to help, Margaret. The ones whose own families have failed them. The ones who understand what it's like to be thrown away like trash. The ones who know what it feels like to be told they don't matter as much as someone else's children." Margaret stared at the check in complete disbelief, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're really not going to help your own brother and sister? They're your family, Adrian. They're your blood, my brother and sister?" I shook my head, and I realized I was smiling, though there was no warmth in it. "We were never siblings, Margaret. We were just children living in the same house until you decided I didn't belong there anymore. They have parents who love them and prioritize them above all else. Let those parents figure out how to pay for their education, just like I had to figure out how to pay for mine. Let them learn what it means to work for something instead of having it handed to them. I leaned back in my chair, feeling calmer than I had since she'd walked into my office. Actually, you know what? I think it'll be good for them. Struggling builds character. Working multiple jobs teaches time management. Being denied things you want makes you appreciate what you have. You did me a favor 12 years ago, Margaret. You taught me that I could only rely on myself, and that lesson made me stronger than I ever would have been if I'd stayed in your comfortable little nest. The tears stopped, and she stood up abruptly, her sadness transforming into something uglier. You've become cold, Adrian. Success has made you heartless. The boy I raised would never have turned his back on family like this. The boy you raised? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. You didn't raise me, Margaret. You housed me for 16 years and then threw me out when I became inconvenient. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, I did despite you, not because of you. The boy you raised died the day you chose Roger's biological children over me. The man sitting in front of you now is someone I created from scratch. I stood up and walked around the desk again, this time not stopping until I was towering over her. And no, being abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally didn't make me heartless. It made me realistic. It taught me that actions matter more than words, that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and that I can only count on myself. That's exactly what James and Emma are going to have to learn too. Roger was right about you, she spat, her mask finally slipping completely. Even when you were little, he said there was something wrong with you, something cold and calculating. He said you were different from other children, that you'd grow up to be selfish and ungrateful, and he was right. I smiled again, and this time there was genuine amusement in it. Ungrateful? That's rich, Margaret. Ungrateful for what exactly? For the years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home? For being reminded constantly that I wasn't really part of the family? For being kicked out the moment I became a financial burden? For having to build myself from absolutely nothing while watching my former family move on without me like I'd never existed? I walked to the window and looked out at the city spread below us. You want to know what I'm grateful for? I'm grateful that you showed me at 16 what conditional love looks like, so I'd never accept it again. I'm grateful that you forced me to become independent, because now I don't need anyone's permission to live my life. I'm grateful that you taught me the difference between people who say they love you and people who actually do. She had no answer for that. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 12 years of unspoken resentment and pain, until I finally broke it. I want you to leave now, Margaret, and I don't want you to contact me again. You made your choice 12 years ago when you decided that Roger's biological children were more important than the son you'd raised since he was 2 years old. You chose to prioritize their comfort over my basic needs. You chose to believe that DNA trumped love and loyalty. Now you get to live with that choice and all its consequences. Margaret gathered her purse with shaking hands, her composure completely shattered. If you change your mind, if you realize that family should help family. I won't change my mind, I said, already turning back to my computer and dismissing her as completely as she had once dismissed me. And Margaret? We were never family. Family doesn't abandon each other when things get tough. Family doesn't hang up on crying children. Family doesn't show up after 12 years looking for money without even bothering to apologize first. Security will escort you out. I pressed the intercom button and spoke to my receptionist. Please have security escort Ms. Blake from the building. She's not welcome here, and she's not to be admitted again under any circumstances. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to see her walk away again. I'd already seen that particular show, and it hadn't gotten any better with age. Instead, I pulled up the website for the Seattle Youth Shelter and arranged for my $50,000 donation to be processed immediately. Then I called my lawyer and made arrangements to ensure that Margaret and her family could never claim any legal connection to my assets or my company. I'd worked too hard and come too far to let them drag me back into their dysfunction. That evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, nursing a glass of whiskey and watching the sun set over the Olympic Mountains. For the first time in 12 years, I felt completely free. I'd spent so long carrying the weight of their rejection, wondering what I'd done wrong. hoping that someday they'd realize their mistake and ask me to come home. I'd fantasized about this moment, imagined Margaret showing up to apologize, to beg my forgiveness, to tell me that losing me had been the biggest mistake of her life. But the reality had been so much better than any fantasy. She hadn't come to apologize. She'd come looking for money. And in that moment I'd realized that I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her acknowledgement of what she'd put me through. I didn't need her validation or her love or her regret. I had built a life without them, a successful life filled with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide for them. The next week, I started the paperwork to legally change my last name. I was done being a Blake. I was done carrying the name of people who had treated me like I was disposable. From now on, I would be Adrian Rivers, a name I chose for myself, representing the flow of life that keeps moving forward no matter what obstacles it encounters. I also made some changes at work. I established a scholarship fund for students who had aged out of foster care or been kicked out by their families. I partnered with local shelters to provide job training and internship opportunities. I used my success to help kids who were going through what I had gone through, because they deserved to know that someone believed in them. Sarah and I got engaged 6 months later. She understood why I needed to create my own family. Why I couldn't just accept the one I'd been born into. Our wedding was small but perfect, filled with people who had chosen to be in our lives and who we had chosen in return. As I looked around at our friends and Sarah's family, who had welcomed me with open arms, I realized something profound. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about people who show up for you when it matters. A year after Margaret's visit, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. James was getting married to his college sweetheart. The invitation was addressed to the Blake family, clearly a mass mailing that included my old address, which the post office had forwarded to my new one. I almost threw it away, but something made me open it. Inside there was a handwritten note from James. I know we haven't talked in years, but I've always wondered about my big brother. I'd love for you to be there if you want to come. Mom told me what happened when she visited you. I understand if you can't forgive us, but I hope you know I never wanted you to leave. I was just a kid, but I remember missing you. I stared at that note for a long time. It was different from Margaret's manipulative plea for money. There was something genuine about it, something that acknowledged the complexity of our situation without trying to minimize my pain or guilt me into compliance. James had been 7 when I left. He probably remembered a version of events filtered through his parents' perspective, but he seemed to have figured out some truths as he got older. But I didn't go to the wedding, not because I was angry with James anymore, but because that chapter of my life was closed. He had his family, the one Margaret and Roger had chosen to prioritize. I had my own life now, my own chosen family of friends and colleagues who supported me. There was no animosity left, just acceptance of what was. Instead, I sent a wedding gift, not expensive, just thoughtful, a nice picture frame with a note. Congratulations on your wedding. I wish you happiness in your new family. I signed it simply Adrian, no last name, no claim to brotherhood, just acknowledgement of a shared past and best wishes for the future. Margaret never contacted me again after that day in my office. I heard through mutual acquaintances that James eventually got a partial scholarship and worked his way through college, just like I had. Emma became a nurse after taking student loans and working nights to pay her tuition. They both turned out fine without my help, proving that necessity really is the mother of invention, and that maybe being handed everything isn't the best preparation for life. Roger and Margaret struggled financially for a few more years, but eventually found their footing when Roger got promoted to warehouse supervisor, and Margaret went back to work as a substitute teacher. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles and no vindication in their eventual stability. They had simply become irrelevant to my story, background characters in a narrative that had moved far beyond them. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not helping James and Emma with college, if I ever wonder what might have been different if I'd taken the high road and shown mercy to the family that had hurt me. The answer is always no, not because I'm cruel or heartless, but because help means something different when it comes freely from people who care about you, versus when it's demanded by people who only contact you when they need something. I learned that I don't owe anyone my success just because we share DNA or history. I don't owe forgiveness to people who aren't truly sorry, and I don't owe explanations to people who never bothered to understand my perspective in the first place. Some relationships are worth fighting for, worth repairing, worth salvaging. Others are better left in the past where they belong. My company now employs over 400 people across 3 locations, and we've implemented one of the most comprehensive employee support programs in the tech industry. We offer tuition assistance, mental health resources, emergency financial aid, and flexible work arrangements for parents and caregivers. These benefits exist because I know what it's like to struggle alone, what it feels like to need help and have nowhere to turn. These are the people I choose to help, people who are working hard and just need a chance, not people who feel entitled to my success because of accidents of birth. My employees earn their place in my professional family every day through their dedication, creativity, and mutual support. They're building something together, creating value for each other and for the world. Sarah and I have been married for 2 years now, and we're expecting our first child. When our daughter is born, she'll grow up knowing she is unconditionally loved and supported. She'll never wonder if she's less important than someone else's children. She'll never be made to feel like a burden or a second-class citizen in her own home. And if we can't have more biological children, we'll adopt. We'll give homes to children who need them, and we'll love them completely, without reservation or comparison to other children. Because that's what real parents do. They don't abandon their children when times get tough. They don't prioritize some children over others based on genetics. They don't use love as a weapon or a bargaining chip. They show up, day after day, year after year, providing the stability and security that allows children to grow into confident, capable adults. Looking back, I can see that Margaret's visit was exactly what I needed. Though not in the way she intended. It wasn't closure. I didn't need her to apologize or acknowledge her mistakes. It was confirmation that I had made the right choice in building a life without them. It was proof that I had become someone who couldn't be manipulated or guilted into relationships that didn't serve me. She thought she was coming to collect on some imaginary debt, as if raising me for 16 years entitled her to a return on investment. What she found instead was a man who had learned to value himself enough to refuse people who only wanted to use him. She expected to find the scared, desperate teenager she'd thrown out, someone who would be so grateful for any scrap of attention that he'd pay any price for it. Instead, she found someone who had built his own family, his own success, his own sense of worth that didn't depend on her validation or approval. The scared teenager who used to lie awake wondering what was wrong with him, why he wasn't worth keeping, was gone. In his place stood someone who understood that being discarded by people who were supposed to love you isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their capacity for love. I never thanked Margaret for kicking me out, because there's nothing to thank her for. The strength I found, the success I built, the man I became, none of that was because of what she did to me. It happened despite what she did to me. The credit belongs to the people who helped me along the way. The teachers who stayed after class to tutor me for free. The bosses who gave me chances when I had no experience. The friends who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Most of all, the credit belongs to that 16-year-old boy who decided that being unwanted by some people didn't make him unworthy of love from others. He's the real hero of this story. He's the one who refused to let their rejection define his future, who turned pain into purpose and abandonment into achievement. As I write this, I'm sitting in the same office where Margaret made her desperate plea 4 years ago, but everything else has changed. The company has expanded to a second building. I'm wearing my wedding ring, and there's an ultrasound photo of my daughter on my desk. Sarah and I have chosen names. If she's born healthy, we'll call her Hope. If something goes wrong, we've already decided to try again, to adopt, to build our family one way or another. Sometimes I wonder if Margaret thinks about that day, if she regrets how she handled things, if she's learned anything from watching James and Emma struggle through college on their own. But mostly, I don't think about her at all. That's the real victory. Not that I punished her or got revenge, but that I stopped letting her rejection define my worth. I learned that blood doesn't make family. Love and respect do. I learned that you can't force people to value you, but you can choose to value yourself enough to walk away from those who don't. And I finally stopped asking for love from people who only knew how to take. The best revenge wasn't hurting them back. It was living so well without them that their presence or absence became completely irrelevant to my happiness. In the end, they didn't abandon me. They freed me to become the person I was always meant to be. Someone who defines family by choice rather than chance. Someone who understands that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And that relationship, unlike the one with Margaret, will never let me down.